But I went ahead and removed the sensor. You can see I got it sitting right there, and I put the oil line going into this container. So what I want to do is just crank over the engine. I'm going to use my power probe right here, crank the engine over, and we just want to check for oil pressure. Okay, if that sensor is faulty or something's wrong with it, that's one thing, but as long as the engine has oil pressure, that's what I'm looking for. As you can see, we did have oil just kind of shat out right into that container, so we do have good oil pressure. That was never really a concern of mine. I knew there was going to be oil pressure. Now, as far as the sensor that goes to the ECU, I did check for our ground 5-volt reference, and everything seems to check out, you know, and it seems it's going to the correct pins on the ECU. I used the legend that the guy who created the harness, he gave me this. I think I showed you guys this in the past. So I did confirm that the wires for that sensor are going to the correct pins on the ECU. But for some reason, the haltech software is not reading any oil pressure at all. So do we have a bad sensor? If we do, that's crappy, because this is like a $150 sensor, you know, but I don't know. It's just a crapshoot at this point. Alright guys, so I'm trying to figure out why this thing is idling so high. I don't think it's a software issue with the computer, okay? I think the engine is like, something's wrong with the engine. What I mean by that is the engine, the intake manifold is taking in way too much air, as if somebody were holding the accelerator down at like 2000 RPM. I think that's what's going on here, hence a vacuum leak, right? So I grabbed my smoke machine and I just put it right here on this port, easy access. I was pumping smoke into the intake manifold, and of course it started to come out the air intake. So then I went ahead and plugged off the air intake, and I checked all around here, guys. There was no vacuum leak, no smoke coming out. As far as all the gaskets for the intake manifold, 100% sealed. All right, and then other tests, I've seen people say, well, when the engine is running, if you can seal off the throttle body and the engine continues to run, then that means there is a pretty sizable vacuum leak somewhere, because it's getting its air source from somewhere else besides the throttle body, if that makes sense. Anyways, I grabbed one of my plugs here because I wouldn't dare to put my hand on this. This thing want to freaking break your fingers and suck your hand in. But I have a cap to plug off throttle bodies, and as soon as I put it there, just sucked it right in, and the engine stalled and shut off, no issues at all. So yeah, no vacuum leaks on any of these gaskets, right? Great. Okay, so that's one thing. And then I decided to look at the throttle body, and guys, look at this. Yes, I do have my flashlight inside of there, so remind me to take my flashlight out of the intake manifold. Let me turn this light off so I can show you guys better. Well, there we go, that's way better. So do you see how wildly inconsistent this is? Look at the top of the plate. That looks pretty consistent, right? It's got like that moon shape, and from left to right it's kind of centered, right? It doesn't look too bad up top, it's not perfect. But look at the bottom. Why is the gap so large on the bottom and like favoring the left side, and to the right side is a little bit more sealed? That does not look right, guys. That is a open throttle body. No wonder this thing is idling at like 2000 RPM. And for, you know, you people who say, well, that's barely open, that's not gonna make a difference. It does not take a lot for RPM to start to raise, even with the slightest little bit of a throttle plate moving. That's a massive gap. And then what I noticed is, what I completely forgot about this, is there is an adjustment screw right here on the back. Turn on the light so you guys can see. It's making contact with the plate underneath it, meaning it's completely bottomed out, and there is space to back out that screw, meaning I could actually get this throttle plate to close a little bit more. Open this up and show you guys. I'm not, you know, giving you any crap. You know, I'm not setting this up to make it look like it's like that. You can see I'm trying to open and close it, open, close it. And look where it just naturally stops. I'm gonna try to fix this, and I got my fingers crossed that this right here is the only reason on why the car is idling so high. So just a correction, I showed you guys how we had that giant leak all on the left side of the plate and it looked tighter on the right side. Well, it turns out that was just because of where I had my flashlight. It was like pointing towards this corner, that's why we see it. So I actually took the time to center my flashlight inside of there. So as you can see, the gap looks more consistent down there. It's just still too far open. So hopefully you guys can see this difference. At the moment, I do have the two screws loose, so the plate is able to float and just kind of be where it wants to be. And the adjustment screw over here is completely backed off, so that the plate is able to close as far as it'll go. And there's definitely a difference, guys. So here's what I'm noticing. If you let it close very soft, leaves a pretty big gap, almost like what we started with, right? And then if I force it, just like push the throttle plate close, you can see there's still a little bit of extra room for it to close. You can see that massive difference that it made. But if you open the throttle plate and just let it slam, it goes to that nice looking way that looks a lot better as far as how much light is coming through. Now keep in mind, guys, you need some air to get past. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't have to be 100% sealed, or else your car wouldn't run. Let me clarify that. Or my car wouldn't run, because I have no idle air control valve. On a normal car that has a idle air control valve, even if your throttle body closed 100%, the idle air control is what takes over and it maintains your car's idle, hence the name of it. And this is why if your throttle body were to get all caked up and dirty, your car still runs, because the idle air control takes care of that. Whereas since I don't have a idle air control valve on this engine, the throttle body is that much more important that it's working properly. So what I want to do is, let's go ahead and start up the engine, and I want to see what the car idles at with the plate fully closed like this. Of course, let me go ahead and get my flashlight out of there. Oh my God. Granted, it's not perfect, right? It's not idling at like 800 RPM like a car, like a normal car. That cluster is off. Let's actually look at what the ECU sees. It's idling way better. Wow, what a difference. RPM, look at that. About 1,000 RPM. I can 100% deal with that. Every time they see this car, everyone's like, oh, do you race? Are you going to go racing? I'm like, nope, it's going to be a glorified grocery getter, because I'm boring and I don't do anything. So, wow, I can't believe I've been chasing my tail about why this thing has been idling so high. And it's something as stupid as the throttle body. Well, I'm glad it's something as stupid as the throttle body, but also I'm kind of disappointed in myself that it took me this long to get around to it. And here's a problem when you're dealing with crap like this is, you get so invested thinking that like, oh, something major is wrong. It's software, or something's not wired up correctly, or something's wrong with the engine. And you lose focus of checking the basics. Guys, can't tell you how many times that has happened to me. And this is where I was telling you that like, okay, the cluster is saying fit like around 1500 RPM, but I was like, it doesn't sound anywhere near like 1500 RPM. And I was correct. It's actually idling closer to 1,000, and you guys saw it dip as low as like 800 sometimes. One more thing I just thought about is, now that the throttle plate is fully closed, meaning it's bottomed out, we cannot close it anymore. And now we got to start thinking about the TPS and its calibration, meaning its position in correlation to that actual plate. I did some research. I went to Acuity's website, and they have a detailed instruction on how to calibrate this TPS. As you can see, I got the 2 screws loosened, and I'm actually back probing the sensor. You can see I got my 2 back probes right there. One is going into the ground wire, another one is going into the sensor wire. Got my voltmeter right here, and I got it set to 5 volts. And basically, I got the sensor maxed out all the way in one direction. You can see there goes our voltage at 0.03, and if I go in the complete opposite direction and max it out, you can see now we got 0.35. So the specification for this is it has to be between 0.48 and 0.5. So I'm just gonna go ahead and turn it back in the other direction until I'm gonna land in the middle and see if I could get to 0.49. So I'm just slowly rotating the TPS. You know, we're splitting hairs at this point. But as you can see, I'm no longer touching it anymore. And we are at 4.9. It looks like it's very consistent. So I'm going to go ahead, tighten down the 2 screws. In fact, we'll just do that right now. And make sure the calibration does not change. And there we go. The sensor is fully tightened down, and we are still at stay at 4.9. Like I said, splitting hairs, right? Anyway, that's the correct way to calibrate this sensor. Let me show you what happens whenever I open the throttle plate and I just let it snap shut. So I'm going to set you up right here in the front of the laptop so you guys can see this better. I want it to return to 0 every single time. So opening up and close. Opening up and close. So that looks really good to me. Just picked this up from Harbor Freight. Nice. And the reason why I picked it up is because you guys know that the CRX was right here in this corner, right? Well, today when I tried to get it out of this corner, not only did I have to move everything that I normally have stored back there, which is all of this crap, it took me like over 30 minutes to get the CRX out of here. And you would think, you see this, you know, transition from here to there, it's nothing for a regular car. You would be able to get out of here in seconds, right? But the CRX idling at 2000 RPM and it's pressed up against a wall like this, you're trying to go back and forth little by little, you know, like Austin Power is stuck in that freaking hallway. Second you just try to slip the clutch, it wants to just jump forward like that. It was a real nightmare. So that's where I got the idea. It's, you know what, we need these rolling dollies for the CRX. So it's the next day, and as you can see, I got the CRX up on the wheel dollies. It was actually super easy to get this thing pushed into the corner, barely an inconvenience. I showed you guys last night that the car is idling much better with the throttle body fully closed. Is the car gonna some miracle just drive great down the road now? No, that's a whole separate issue. This is specifically just attacking the high idle, and I feel like that has been resolved. Now the throttle body is sticking a little bit, and apparently that's another common issue with these throttle bodies. You know, I'm hoping that it breaks in over time and it gets smoother, but when it's in its like fully closed position, that first initial press of the gas pedal feels like a little sticky. But you know, whatever, I hope that breaks in over time. The next thing is, so I keep complaining about how the oil pressure sensor is not reading, and I don't think the sensor's bad. I really do think it's a software issue, like something's not right, because inside of the software, next to the oil pressure sensor, there's like a red exclamation mark, and it says like sensor not assigned or something like that. When you go clicking on it, like none of it makes sense to me. I don't understand what the software is telling me that needs to be done. And this is why you have professional tuners that know exactly what they're looking at and what has to be done. To the average Joe, you wouldn't even know where to start. But what I could try to do is rule out whether this sensor is bad or not. So this sensor is not only a oil pressure sensor, but it's also a fuel pressure sensor. So I have a fuel pressure gauge right here. It's a mechanical one, of course. But what I could do is take off this sensor, plumb it in right here, of course, remove this one, plumb it into the fuel pressure regulator, plug it in, and as you can see, my harness does have a connector right here. I have it just zip tied out of the way, but this connector is for fuel pressure, and it would reach all the way over here to plug in. Alright, so there we have it. Sensor is plumbed in, and here goes the harness plugged in. As you can see, it says fuel on it. Everything looks real good. I'm just going to go ahead and verify that we don't have any leaks, which looks like we might. So I might have to tighten down that fitting just a hair. But I had the great idea of taking that mechanical gauge and putting it on the oil pressure side. So I don't know if this is a bad idea of using a fuel pressure gauge as a oil pressure, but we're about to find out. So hopefully we get a reading on this and we could get an idea of what our oil pressure is. All right, guys, so she's idling nicely. I don't see any leaks at all on the oil or the gasoline. Oh wait, yeah, I see a drip on the gasoline side, so let me go ahead and turn her off. But oil pressure, we got almost 90 psi of oil pressure. So I'm really glad to finally see oil pressure for the first time. Even if it is on a mechanical gauge, at least I could see we have almost 90 psi. So with the other sensor on the fuel pressure side, this is what I'm talking about, guys. So I'm getting the same exact thing from when this sensor was on the oil pressure side. So look at this warning. It says this function has unassigned or invalid connections. And this is the same exact warning when the sensor was on the oil pressure side, and I don't know what this means. You get what I'm saying? I don't know how to mess with any of this stuff. All I could see is this. Since I activated it, I turned it on, the fuel pressure is reading something right here. So let me go ahead and take care of the little drip that we have. and I want to see if this sensor actually reads anything. So this is the same exact screen that I saw with the sensor on the oil pressure side. It wants you to assign a connection or clear a connection. If you hit assign, which is what it wants you to do, you get all of this mess. It says all of these down here are assigned functions, and these are the available resources. So there's only two. You know, do I just pick one? I don't understand, because the wires for those specific sensors are pinned into the ECU. I don't freaking know. I'm just gonna choose that one, see what happens. We have a number. Sorry, get you guys in frame there. So I picked a random connection, and all of a sudden we get that bouncing around number as our fuel pressure. Let me start up the engine and see what happens. Guys, that's the same type. Let me shut this off. You see how that fuel pressure sensor is bouncing around between, I don't know, what was it, like 90 psi and then like maxed out 145 or 150? That's the same exact thing the sensor was doing when it was on the oil pressure side. I don't know, guys. I think we have a bad sensor, because that sensor was acting the same way on the oil pressure side. You move it over to the fuel pressure side and it's still reading the same type of nonsense. It's not constant. It's just a number that's always bouncing around like crazy. There's one more thing I'm noticing, is we have a small box right here that says pull up. Sometimes sensors are pull up or pull down design. Let's go ahead and disable that and see if the sensor acts any different. Switch it back over to pull up. So that sensor is acting the same exact way, very erratic, and it doesn't have a constant reading on it. At this point, I think I want to try a different sensor. So that just means I'm gonna have to buy another sensor, unfortunately. Alright guys, so I think I'm done messing with this for right now until I could get these sensors in. I decided to order 2 sensors because I think it'd be really beneficial to not only have a oil pressure sensor that the ECU can see, but also the fuel pressure sensor. Because I did notice that when the engine was running, and you remember the drop down box that I showed you guys that I disabled it where it said pull up? Well, I had the engine running when it was disabled, and I did notice that when I enabled it, it changed the idle of the engine. So basically the way I interpret that is the ECU is able to see fuel pressure, and if it can see fuel pressure, it can control fuel tuning a lot better, because you get what I'm saying. Basically, the more data you could feed to the computer, the more accurate it can run your engine, and more efficient, I should say. So yeah, sure, having a mechanical gauge like this is great, and I'm glad I have this, because when it was on the fuel side, I could see my fuel pressure when the engine was running, and when I moved it to the oil side, I could see our oil pressure, which is about 90 psi at idle. So this thing has definitely come in hand, but it's way more beneficial to have sensors on each of these units so that the ECU can actually see them. On top of that, once I get my dash all set up, I'll be able to see oil and fuel pressure right from the driver's seat, instead of a gauge that's tucked in underneath the hood here where it's kind of useless 90% of the time. You get what I'm saying? So I went to Fueltech's website, and I'm going to order 2 sensors from Fueltech. And thankfully, they use the same exact connector type right here. So it has the same fitting. It'll thread right into here, and it's going to plug right into the existing harness that I already have. That'll be like $300 right there for 2 freaking sensors, but it is what it is. It's just another drop in the bucket at this point. Okay, so I finally got the Fueltech sensors in. As you can see, I got this one plumbed in already for the oil pressure, and I got the fuel pressure already plumbed in as well. Let me go ahead and get rid of, no, I'm gonna leave that because I haven't primed up the system yet, and I don't know if we have leaks. Just want to show you guys that the new sensors are installed. So let's start up the computer. All right, so I got the car running, and unfortunately, as See the oil and the fuel pressure? Still pretty much doing the same exact thing. That really sucks. So yeah, that just tells me that my haltech sensor is not bad. There's something else going on here. I don't know, guys. I don't know what to do next. Oh my god, guys. So I finally got it working. I've been messing with the computer, looking at the printout that was provided with me from the guy who made the harness for the car, and I noticed some things. Okay, you can see the fuel pressure is actually reading correctly now. You see it dropping, and that's a result of my bad fuel pump, but it's working. You see expected fuel pressure is 50 and the actual fuel pressure is 15 and dropping. Let's go ahead and prime the fuel pump again. I can do that just by pushing this button right here, and we're going to see the fuel pressure go up. There it goes. So how did I get this to work? Well, when you go into fuel pressure, like I showed you guys, you go to assign, right? And as you can see, I have two options available, right? SP11. I know it's hard to see. That looks like a weird thing right after the P, but it is like a 1, I guess. And then we got SP12. So I was picking one of these, and of course it wasn't giving me a good signal on my actual fuel or oil pressure. So I pulled out the paperwork that the guy provided me, the guy who made the harness, and then I started testing my own wires, making sure the 3 wires that go to the fuel pressure sensor, that everything checks out and everything's pinned correctly, and it is. So the way he labeled this legend or key is correct. It is wired up correctly just as he specified, but I went ahead and labeled everything because he didn't label some things. So the sensor ground is going to be the same exact ground for the fuel pressure sensor as well as the oil pressure sensor. You can see I got it marked right there, oil pressure and fuel. So they use the same ground. Okay. As far as the 5-volt reference, again, the fuel pressure and oil pressure sensor use the same exact wire for 5-volt reference, and that checks out. The only difference, of course, is the actual signal wires. For the oil pressure, it's going to be a green wire. You can see he got that labeled as oil pressure. And on the fuel pressure down here, you can see he has it labeled as fuel pressure, a green wire. That's what's going to be different, okay? So one thing that I noticed is if I come to the side over here, B12, I went on the connectors that go to the ECU, and in fact, fuel pressure signal wire is B12, pin B12 on the ECU. And then I noticed on the left side over here, which I never really understood what all of these things are, but then right next to B12 I noticed it says AV16, and I'm like, hey, I've seen those numbers before, those like numbers and letters before, and they all happen to be in here when you go into assigning wiring for a specific sensor. The problem is the ones that are available to choose are the SP11 and SP12, which I'm like, how is that possible if on the paperwork it says in order to get fuel pressure working, that B12 wire needs to go to AV16. So I just scroll down in the list right here. Now these are all inputs that are not available because they're already taken up by something. But look, I did find AV16 right there. You can see I got it highlighted, and I clicked it, and I assigned this one to fuel pressure because that's what the paperwork says. Fuel pressure B12 should be AV16. And after I assigned it, of course the computer is telling me, oh, this is conflicting with something else because something else was already tied to AV16. I don't know what it was, I can't remember at this point. But after choosing AV16, I hit OK, and boom, now we have our fuel pressure working. As you can see, it has dropped like a stone in water because of my bad fuel pump. But once again, let me go ahead and cycle the key, and we'll see that fuel pressure bump right up again. There it goes, 54 psi. Now, okay, I'm gonna do this in real time. Now let's go over to the oil pressure sensor and do the same thing. Okay, so I'm gonna type in oil right here. if I could spell correctly. Type in oil over here in the search bar. Go to oil pressure wiring. Over here you can see it says we need to assign a input for oil pressure. Okay, so we go there. Again, this is where I was going wrong. When it goes to assign, it says that you only have 2 available options because everything else is already being utilized. Well, let's disregard that and let's go look at our paperwork. Okay, oil pressure signal, green, oil PSI, A2. I did confirm that it is pin A2. Anyways, it's gonna be AV14. So let's look for AV14. And there it goes right there, guys, AV14. It says that it's already assigned to something. Brake pedal switch input. Yeah, that's obviously not correct because our paperwork is showing us that AV14 is designated for oil pressure sensor. So we're gonna go ahead and click this one and hit OK. And since I assigned that AV whatever it was to oil pressure sensor, you can see it's giving me a red warning saying that oil pressure input is in conflict with the brake pedal switch. I went to the corner right here and typed in brake, and I found the brake pedal switch, and you can see they allow you to assign, right? So I went looking through my paperwork again, looking for anything that says brake pedal, and I can't find anything, guys. So it's just not labeled here in the paperwork, and honestly I don't know where to assign it, but it's conflicting with the oil pressure. Basically, you can't have 2 different things going to the same signal wire. So for the time being, what I'm going to do is simply go to sensors, brake pedal switch, and I'm just gonna deactivate this. All right, so it's no longer conflicting. Now the oil pressure sensor is the only one that's assigned to that SP14 or whichever it was. Oh, AV14. Okay, so man, you can see how, look at that, fuel pressure just tanked down to like less than 1 psi. Yeah, I got to get around to putting in that new fuel pump. Anyway, let's go ahead. We seem to have something now. Look, all the red indicators have gone away. Fuel pressure went up. That's reading something. I know it's 0, but the engine's not running, of course. So let's go ahead and start it, and we should have working oil pressure and fuel pressure now. There goes our oil pressure and our fuel pressure. But guys, look at that oil pressure. How come with the mechanical gauge it was reading 90 psi almost, and over here it's reading 13 psi. So I'm trying to figure out why the oil pressure is reading so low. So if I come over here to sensors and oil pressure, you can see they have like this, it's like a map for the sensor. So basically at 1.6 volts, you would have almost no pressure. So basically we are reading what, I think it said 13 psi. So if we come up to about 13 psi, that means this thing is reading, you know, somewhere like 2 volts. And the only way you're going to get all the way up to 90, what we were seeing on the mechanical gauge, is if you come way over here and it doesn't reach 90 to almost like a complete 5 volts. So what this means is I'm pretty sure we have to change the scale. There's no way this scale right here is going to work. So what we could do is, basically this is a calibration file. So you pull up files right here and you are looking for the correct file, and you could go through this whole entire thing. And like I showed you guys, I switched over to the fuel tech sensors, but I have no doubt that if I were to reinstall that haltech sensor, it would work just fine. But what I'm going to do is find the map for that haltech sensor, and we know it's 150 psi. So, or I could probably even use Bosch, because I'm pretty sure this might be a Bosch sensor, but who knows. I'll just use haltech's, even though we're not technically using a haltech. Let's try this, okay? Because I did the same exact thing for the fuel pressure side. So here it goes right here, pressure, haltech, 150 psi. We'll go ahead and do that, and we're gonna see, remember the map I was showing you? Watch it change. Look at that, way different map. Now go ahead, save the settings, and let's see if we get a different fuel pressure reading now besides 13 psi. Let me go ahead and start it up. And boom, guys, right there. Oil pressure and fuel pressure finally working. Look at those numbers. That mechanical gauge was not lying. It was showing us almost 90 psi at idle, and that's exactly what the new sensor is reading. I'm gonna go ahead and shut this off before I die here in the garage, but this is such a roller coaster, guys, and it's a financial roller coaster. But I'm just so glad I was able to figure it out myself and figure out why the sensors weren't working and what I had to do. Alright, so one final thing, the tuner was telling me that the wideband wasn't working correctly. So here I am just messing with this, see if I can figure something out. We keep getting all these errors for narrowband, but if I remember correctly, this sensor is not a narrowband, it's a wideband. But you can see narrowband is activated, so we'll turn that off. We'll turn on wideband, and then we go over here, and of course, since you turned that on, let's see what it says. Okay, we'll leave that enabled, and we're gonna go over to wiring and the classic screen. We're all too familiar with this one already, right? So it wants us to assign something, and available resources, yeah, there aren't any. It won't even give me an option to choose something. That's weird. Okay. Well, I thought the wideband works off of the CAN system, so we'll go into haltech CAN over here in the bottom. WBC 1, I think that's what we have. Let me check. It's called WB1, but it's wideband controller, so I think that's what that stands for, WBC. Okay, so where do I go now? So that's turned on. Alright, we have to assign something. Oh, now we have an available connection since we went through the CAN system. Can I pick that? It sure can. Hit OK. And look, all the errors went away. Okay, looks good. Restart the system. Let's just fix the vehicle name right here real fast just to get this very last warning out of the way. Vehicle name, I know it's, yeah, it's already got me saved, so I'll hit yes. And that's it, that was the last error. Okay. Alright, nothing else is red. And you can see the O2 lambda right there in the corner. It just says stopped, but it is acknowledging that the air-fuel ratio or the wideband sensor is connected. Alright, so we should be good to go ahead and start up the engine. And once the engine is running, after a little while, this sensor should come alive and start working. As you can see, it says sensor code. I just turned the engine on right now, and there it goes. No warnings, no nothing. Everything seems to be happy. Nice. Don't you just love when you create your own problems and it just drives you crazy? So as of recently, I go to start the CRX and it would run for like 2 or 3 seconds and then just stall. Crank it back up, it'll run 2 or 3 seconds and then stall. And I'm like, this thing's acting like it's running out of fuel. So then so what I was doing was I kept jumping into the car to start the engine from the passenger side because the driver's side door is pretty much blocked by all that crap over there. So anyway, as you can see, I got a big mess in here and I kept stepping right here to get into the car. Well, I didn't realize that the relays for the fuel pump were actually right here because they were covered by all kinds of paper and crap. So when I finally moved the papers out the way, I found this fuse just sitting on the ground like this, and it's all bent and twisted. This one was still hanging on for dear life, but it was also bent and twisted, and the terminals have even been spread out to the point where if you grab the fuse and try to pop it in, it wouldn't even stay in. That's how spread open the pins were, or the terminal. So I had to go in there with my little pick and try to close up the gap. It's not perfect, but it was just enough to hold on to the fuses now. And the fuses aren't, you can see how bent and twisted everything is, so that sucks. The fuses still work, but you can see they are bent, so I'm just gonna go ahead and replace them. I got spare fuses here, but yeah, just a stupid issue that I created myself. So I'll make sure to keep this thing over here and tucked out of the way where I'm not stepping. Just stupid issues like this. At least I'm glad I figured it out relatively quick. So another thing, I went ahead and reinstalled the haltech pressure sensor, only because I already went through the trouble of making this custom bracket to hold the sensor. You can see how nicely it holds it, and honestly there's no reason to not use it. Why would I use the fuel tech sensor and have to make this another elaborate bracket just to hold the sensor? For what? The original sensor works. We established that. So that's what I did. I just went back to it, and of course on the fuel side it's going to keep the fuel tech sensor because there's no issues with that one. So I just got a spare sensor now. I could either just keep it for spare parts, or I could literally sell it on eBay as used and sell it for a little bit less than what I paid for it. It's still literally like a brand new part. You know, it's got less than like 2 minutes of runtime on it. But who knows, I may hold on to it. So, and I'm going to show you guys in a second that the haltech sensor is reading oil pressure correctly now, since we fixed all the stuff on the laptop. Okay, so there's that. Another thing, she is running beautifully. Now I'm not saying she's drivable, because for some reason when I hit the accelerator pedal it wants to stall out, but I'm just talking about it's just the engine by itself running and idling. She just purrs like a kitten. So let me go ahead and start her up, and then we'll have a close look at the laptop, and I'll show you guys that the haltech sensor is working. We'll look at the laptop right now. Okay, look at our oil pressure, proving that the haltech sensor does work. And you can see my fuel pressure, I adjusted it as close as I can to 43.5, and it's matching the expected fuel pressure. So everything looks great as far as the two sensors. And she sounds really good. Just idling real nice. No fuel leaks, nothing, no oil leaks. Sounds absolutely fantastic. Since the engine heavily relies on the map sensor to determine, you know, fuel trims and all that kind of stuff and how much air is coming in, I know some people are gonna think, well, maybe your map sensor is faulty. Well, initially I thought I had like a no-name brand sensor, but upon closer inspection it says Denso on it. So Denso is like OEM. Alright, so I don't feel too bad about that. When the engine was running, I put my vacuum gauge on it, and you could see that the mechanical vacuum gauge is pulling at about 22 psi of vacuum. And that's in line with what the sensor is also reading at idle. So everything's starting to add up, but I figure, you know what, one more final test. I went ahead and removed the sensor from the manifold, and I'm going to manually pull a vacuum on it using my vacuum pump. And you can see here we're just like key on, engine off. You can see there's pretty much no vacuum on the map sensor. And as I start to pull a vacuum using my pump, you can see the sensor, and I'm going nice and smooth, but you can see that the sensor responds. There's no erratic movement. Everything seems to be increasing at a steady rate as I pump the vacuum. And I'm just gonna go all the way up to what the sensor normally goes into during idle, which would be about -22. And you can see as I pull a vacuum on the map sensor, it changes the I'm guessing that's the injector pulse width right there where it says 1.9. I'm gonna go ahead and release the vacuum off of the map sensor, and you can see the injector rate is also gonna change with it. Okay, so basically I've done 2 different tests just to verify that the map sensor is not an issue. It's a Denso part, so it's a good quality part, and everything seems to be lining up as far as the sensor working. So I know my TPS works good, I know my map sensor works good. Well, the obvious thing next is I gotta drop the gas tank. It needs that new fuel pump.